There's a moment when the alarm goes off and your hand reaches for the snooze button before your brain even wakes up. That moment when you watch yourself choose comfort over change, scrolling instead of starting, hiding instead of showing up. And in that moment, you wonder, why does the thing I want most feel impossible to do? Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand why modern psychology reveals that your undisciplined self isn't weak. It's intelligent. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do, and fighting against millions of years of evolution with willpower alone. We don't talk about what it does to a person to watch themselves break the same promise every single day. To set an alarm with genuine intention, knowing full well you'll negotiate with yourself in the morning. To walk past your unused gym equipment or unfinished projects and feel that familiar weight of disappointment settling in your chest. Not because you hate yourself, but because you don't understand yourself anymore. You know what you should do. You even want to do it. But between knowing and doing lies a psychological chasm that willpower can't bridge. The neuroscientist Dr. Robert Sapolsky once said, "We are nothing more or less than the sum of our biology and our experiences." But what if your struggle with discipline isn't a character flaw? What if it's your brain trying to protect you from something it perceives as dangerous? That's where we begin. Because what if I told you the version of you that procrastinates, avoids, and gives up isn't who you are? What if that's just your nervous system running programs designed for a world that no longer exists? If this is already shifting something inside you, don't just watch. Subscribe, because this channel exists for the parts of your psychology that no one else explains. You've been trained to think discipline is about force, but that's not true. Discipline isn't about overpowering your brain. It's about understanding why your brain resists in the first place. And you will never become disciplined until you stop fighting your psychology and start working with it. The ancient brain in a modern world. Your struggle with discipline isn't happening in 2025. It's happening in 50,000 BC, every single day, inside your skull. The human brain evolved over millions of years to solve problems that no longer exist. While you're trying to wake up early to work on your goals, your brain is scanning for saber-toothed tigers. While you're trying to resist the donut, your brain is preparing for famine. While you're trying to push through discomfort to grow, your brain is treating any discomfort as a potential threat to survival. This is the fundamental mismatch that makes discipline feel impossible. You're asking a prehistoric brain to thrive in a modern world, and it's doing everything it can to keep you alive in an environment that disappeared thousands of years ago. The limbic system, your brain's emotional center, operates on ancient programming. It doesn't understand delayed gratification because in ancestral environments, delayed gratification often meant death. If there was food available, you ate it. If there was safety available, you took it. If there was immediate pleasure available, you pursued it, because tomorrow might not come. But now you live in a world where the most important rewards, career success, health, meaningful relationships, personal growth, all require delaying gratification. Your ancient brain literally cannot comprehend why you would choose future benefits over immediate comfort. This creates what psychologists call temporal discounting, the tendency to value immediate rewards much more highly than future rewards, even when the future rewards are objectively better. your brain experiences the gap between now and later as exponentially larger than it actually is. When you set a goal to exercise tomorrow morning, your prefrontal cortex, the newer, rational part of your brain, genuinely means it. But when tomorrow morning arrives, your limbic system evaluates the situation and concludes that lying in bed is safer, easier, and more immediately rewarding than the uncertain, uncomfortable experience of exercise. The conflict you feel isn't between your disciplined self and your lazy self. It's between two different brain systems with two different evolutionary priorities, both trying to keep you alive according to their own ancient wisdom. Understanding this conflict changes everything. You stop seeing your resistance to discipline as weakness and start seeing it as intelligence, misapplied intelligence, but intelligence nonetheless. Your brain isn't broken. It's just optimized for a different world. The neuroscience of self-control. The battle for discipline happens in real time inside your brain, and neuroscience can show you exactly where and how this battle unfolds. Understanding the neurological reality of self-control explains why willpower feels so difficult and why it's often not enough. The prefrontal cortex, located right behind your forehead, is your brain's CEO. It's responsible for planning, decision-making, and what neuroscientists call executive function. When you make a resolution to change your behavior, your prefrontal cortex is driving that decision. But the prefrontal cortex is also the most energy-expensive part of your brain. It requires glucose to function optimally, and when you're tired, stressed, hungry, or emotionally depleted, it goes offline first. This is why discipline feels easier in the morning and gets progressively harder throughout the day. Meanwhile, the limbic system, which includes the amygdala and other emotional processing centers, is always running in the background, monitoring for threats and opportunities. The limbic system is fast, automatic, and energy efficient. It doesn't require conscious thought or effort to influence your behavior. When these two systems conflict, the limbic system usually wins, not because it's stronger, but because it's faster and more efficient. By the time your prefrontal cortex recognizes that you're reaching for your phone instead of starting your work, your limbic system has already initiated the action. Brain imaging studies reveal something fascinating about people with strong self-discipline. They don't have more willpower. They have better communication between their prefrontal cortex and limbic system. Their brains are more integrated, allowing rational goals to influence emotional impulses more effectively. This integration happens through a brain structure called the anterior cingulate cortex, which acts like a bridge between rational and emotional processing. People with well-developed anterior cingulate cortex can literally feel their emotions while making rational decisions, instead of being overwhelmed by emotions or disconnected from them. But here's the crucial insight. This brain integration isn't fixed. Neuroplasticity research shows that you can strengthen the connections between rational and emotional brain centers through specific practices. The brain you have now isn't the brain you're stuck with forever. Meditation, for example, has been shown to increase grey matter density in the prefrontal cortex while reducing amygdala reactivity. Exercise increases production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which supports the growth of new neural connections. Even simple practices like taking deep breaths before making decisions can strengthen the neural pathways that support self-control. The neuroscience reveals that discipline isn't about forcing your brain to behave differently. It's about training your brain to integrate emotional and rational processing more effectively, so that self-control becomes more automatic and less effortful over time. The psychology of instant gratification. To understand why discipline feels impossible, you need to understand why instant gratification feels irresistible. The psychology of immediate reward isn't just about laziness or weakness. It's about fundamental brain chemistry that can hijack your decision-making before you're even aware choices are being made. Dopamine, often misunderstood as the pleasure chemical, is actually the anticipation chemical. Your brain releases dopamine not when you get a reward, but when you expect to get a reward. This system evolved to motivate action toward beneficial outcomes, but modern technology has weaponized it in ways that make discipline nearly impossible. Every time you check your phone, scroll social media, or engage in any instantly rewarding behavior, you're triggering dopamine release. Your brain learns to associate these activities with immediate chemical reward, creating what neuroscientists call supernormal stimuli, artificial triggers that provide more intense reward than anything in the natural environment. This creates a neurochemical competition that discipline can't win. When your brain can get immediate dopamine from checking your phone, why would it choose the delayed, uncertain dopamine from completing a difficult task? The instant gratification literally hijacks the reward system that discipline depends on. But dopamine addiction isn't just about individual behaviors. It's about attention itself. Modern environments are designed to fragment your attention into shorter and shorter intervals. Social media platforms, news websites, and entertainment systems all profit from keeping you in a state of constant stimulation and distraction. This constant stimulation creates what researchers call attention residue, mental fatigue from constantly switching between tasks and stimuli. Even when you try to focus on discipline-requiring activities, part of your attention remains occupied by the psychological noise of unstimulated desire for stimulation. The psychology of instant gratification also involves what Daniel Kahneman called System 1 thinking, fast, automatic, intuitive decision-making that requires no conscious effort. Most instant gratification behaviors are System 1 responses. You see the phone notification, you check it. You feel bored, you scroll. You feel uncomfortable, you distract yourself. Discipline, by contrast, requires System 2 thinking. Slow, deliberate, effortful decision-making that requires conscious attention and energy. The problem is that System 2 thinking is limited by mental energy and cognitive resources, while System 1 thinking can run indefinitely without fatigue. This means that willpower-based approaches to discipline are fighting an unfair battle. You're trying to use limited System 2 resources to constantly override unlimited System 1 responses. Eventually, System 2 gets exhausted and System 1 takes over automatically. Understanding this psychology reveals why traditional discipline advice often fails. Telling someone to just use more willpower is like telling them to hold their breath longer. It might work temporarily, but it's not sustainable because it's fighting against fundamental psychological and neurological realities. The solution isn't to eliminate instant gratification entirely. It's to understand how instant gratification works, so you can design your environment and habits to work with your psychology rather than against it. the trauma of broken promises to yourself. There's a psychological wound that most people carry, but never name. The trauma of repeatedly breaking promises to yourself. Every time you say you'll start tomorrow and don't. Every time you set a goal and abandon it. Every time you choose immediate comfort over future growth. You're creating micro-betrayals that accumulate into a profound loss of self-trust. This isn't dramatic language, it's psychological reality. When you consistently fail to follow through on commitments to yourself, your subconscious mind begins to doubt your reliability. You start to approach your own goals with skepticism because your track record suggests you won't actually do what you say you'll do. Carl Jung understood this dynamic deeply. He wrote about the shadow self, the parts of our personality we reject, suppress, or refuse to acknowledge. For many people struggling with discipline, their disciplined, achieving, growing self has become shadow. They've identified so strongly with being undisciplined that actually following through on goals feels foreign and threatening to their sense of self. This creates what psychologists call identity-behavior conflict. When your behavior, procrastination, avoidance, giving up, becomes your identity, I'm lazy, I'm unmotivated, I'm undisciplined, then acting disciplined feels like betraying who you are. Your subconscious mind will sabotage disciplined behavior to maintain consistency with your self-concept. The trauma compounds because each failure reinforces the identity. Every broken promise becomes evidence that you're the kind of person who doesn't follow through. Every abandoned goal becomes proof that you don't have what it takes. Eventually, you stop making commitments to yourself altogether to avoid the pain of inevitable disappointment. This is why many people feel more afraid of starting than of staying stuck. Starting means risking another failure, another confirmation that you can't trust yourself, another addition to the pile of evidence that you're not capable of change. But Jung also provided the solution to this dilemma. He believed that healing required integration, bringing the shadow aspects of personality back into conscious awareness and accepting them as part of the whole self. Applied to discipline, this means acknowledging both your capacity for discipline and your tendency toward avoidance, without judging either as fundamentally good or bad. The path forward isn't to eliminate your undisciplined self, but to understand why it exists and what it's trying to protect you from. Often, avoidance and procrastination are intelligent responses to perfectionism, overwhelm, or fear of failure. Your undisciplined self isn't lazy. It's trying to keep you safe from psychological pain. When you understand your resistance rather than fighting it, you can begin to negotiate with it. Instead of forcing yourself to be disciplined, you can create conditions where discipline feels safe and sustainable. Instead of trying to eliminate your capacity for rest and comfort, you can integrate rest and growth into a coherent approach to living. This integration requires grieving the fantasy of effortless discipline and accepting the reality of being human, someone who sometimes chooses growth and sometimes chooses comfort, and who can learn to choose more consciously rather than perfectly. The modern environment versus ancient impulses. The world you're trying to be disciplined in was designed by people who understand your psychology better than you do. Every app, website, store, and entertainment system is engineered to exploit the exact psychological vulnerabilities that make discipline difficult. Social media platforms employ teams of neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists to create what former Google design ethicist Tristan Harris calls persuasive technology. Interfaces designed to capture and hold your attention using the same psychological principles that make gambling addictive. The notification system on your phone triggers what B.F. Skinner identified as the most addictive reward schedule: variable ratio reinforcement. You never know when you'll get a rewarding notification, so your brain maintains constant vigilance for the next potential reward. This creates a state of chronic psychological arousal that makes sustained focus on long-term goals nearly impossible. Meanwhile, food companies invest billions in creating what industry insiders call bliss points, combinations of sugar, salt, and fat that trigger maximum reward response in your brain. These engineered foods provide more intense pleasure than anything your ancestors ever encountered, making natural foods feel boring and unsatisfying by comparison. Entertainment systems are designed to eliminate any moment of boredom or discomfort that might motivate you toward growth-oriented activities. Streaming services use algorithmic recommendation systems to ensure you always have immediate access to content that provides effortless stimulation and emotional regulation. Even shopping has been gamified to exploit your reward systems. Online retailers use psychological techniques like artificial scarcity, social proof, and variable reward schedules to make purchasing feel exciting and urgent, rather than thoughtful and deliberate. The cumulative effect is an environment that provides constant opportunities for instant gratification while requiring discipline for almost every meaningful long-term outcome. Your brain, which evolved in environments where survival required constant alertness to immediate threats and opportunities, is overwhelmed by the volume and intensity of modern stimulation. This isn't conspiracy, it's capitalism. Companies profit by capturing your attention and triggering your desire for immediate gratification. The more time and mental energy you spend on their products, the more money they make. Your discipline problem is their business model. Understanding this environmental reality explains why individual willpower often isn't enough to create lasting change. You're not just fighting your own psychological tendencies, you're fighting sophisticated systems designed by teams of experts to exploit those exact tendencies. But recognizing the scope of the challenge also reveals the solution. Instead of trying to overpower your environment with willpower, you can redesign your environment to support discipline rather than undermine it. Instead of relying on motivation to overcome environmental obstacles, you can remove the obstacles and make discipline the path of least resistance. This requires what researchers call environmental design thinking, consciously structuring your physical and digital environments to promote the behaviors you want while making unwanted behaviors more difficult or less appealing. The goal isn't to eliminate all comfort or convenience, but to create friction around behaviors that work against your long-term goals while reducing friction around behaviors that support them. The neuroplasticity of discipline. The most hopeful discovery in neuroscience is that your brain can change throughout your entire life. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural connections and reorganize existing ones, means that the brain patterns that make discipline difficult now can be changed through specific practices and experiences. Every time you choose discomfort over comfort, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with self-control. Every time you delay gratification, you increase the connectivity between your prefrontal cortex and limbic system. Every time you act according to your values rather than your impulses, you make value-based action more automatic in the future. But neuroplasticity works both ways. Every time you choose immediate gratification over long-term goals, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with impulse control. Every time you avoid discomfort, you make discomfort avoidance more automatic. Your brain is constantly adapting to reinforce the patterns you practice most frequently. This means that your current struggle with discipline isn't permanent, it's just well practiced. The neural patterns that make discipline feel impossible were built through repetition, and they can be rebuilt through different repetition. Research on habit formation reveals that significant neuroplastic changes can occur in as little as 21 days of consistent practice, with more substantial changes occurring over 90-day periods. The key is understanding that neuroplasticity requires specific conditions, repetition, attention, and progressive challenge. Repetition means consistently practicing new behaviors until they become automatic. You can't change brain patterns with sporadic effort. You need daily practice that gives your brain clear signals about which neural connections to strengthen. Attention means bringing conscious awareness to the behaviors you're trying to change. When you practice new behaviors mindlessly, you don't get the same neuroplastic benefits as when you practice with focused attention on what you're doing and why. Progressive challenge means gradually increasing the difficulty of disciplined behaviors over time. Just like physical exercise, your self-control muscles need progressive overload to grow stronger. Starting with tiny, manageable challenges and gradually building complexity creates sustainable neuroplastic change. Studies of meditation practitioners show that even 8 weeks of mindfulness practice can create measurable changes in brain structure, including increased grey matter in areas associated with learning and memory, and decreased grey matter in the amygdala, which is associated with fear and stress response. Exercise research shows that regular physical activity increases production of BDNF, which supports the growth of new neural connections, particularly in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, the brain regions most important for learning, memory, and executive function. Even cognitive training exercises can create specific neuroplastic changes. People who practice working memory tasks show increased activity and connectivity in the prefrontal cortex, which translates to improved self-control in other areas of life. The most important insight from neuroplasticity research is that you're not stuck with the brain you have now. The patterns that make discipline feel impossible can be changed, but only through understanding how neuroplasticity works and designing practices that work with these natural change processes rather than against them. The psychology of identity and behavior. The deepest level of discipline isn't about what you do, it's about who you are. Or more precisely, it's about who you believe you are. Your self-concept is the most powerful predictor of your behavior because humans have a profound psychological need to act consistently with their identity. James Clear, in his research on behavior change, identified 3 levels at which change can occur. Outcome changes, what you want to achieve. Process changes, what you do. And identity changes, who you are. Most people focus on outcomes and processes while ignoring identity, which is why their changes don't stick. When you try to become disciplined while still identifying as an undisciplined person, you create internal conflict that usually resolves in favor of maintaining identity consistency. Your subconscious mind will sabotage disciplined behaviors to preserve the psychological coherence of seeing yourself as someone who doesn't follow through. This is why temporary discipline often leads to eventual regression. You might force yourself to exercise for a few weeks, but if you still see yourself as someone who hates exercise, you'll eventually return to behaviors that match that identity. The solution is identity-based habit formation. Instead of trying to achieve disciplined outcomes, focus on becoming the type of person who naturally engages in disciplined behaviors. Instead of trying to lose weight, focus on becoming someone who makes healthy choices. Instead of trying to be productive, focus on becoming someone who values deep work. This shift from outcome-focused to identity-focused discipline changes everything about how you approach behavior change. When disciplined action becomes an expression of who you are, rather than something you're forcing yourself to do, it becomes sustainable and self-reinforcing. But identity change requires evidence. You can't just decide to see yourself differently. You need proof that supports the new identity. This is where small, consistent actions become crucial. Every time you act in a way that's consistent with your desired identity, you're casting a vote for that version of yourself. One disciplined action doesn't change your identity, but 100 disciplined actions begin to shift how you see yourself. 1,000 disciplined actions create unshakable confidence in your disciplined identity. The behavior creates the identity, which then makes future behavior easier and more automatic. Research on identity and behavior shows that people will often act against their own apparent interests to maintain identity consistency. Someone who identifies as not a morning person will resist evidence that they could benefit from waking up early. Someone who identifies as not good with money will unconsciously sabotage financial progress to maintain that self-concept. This psychological dynamic explains why many people feel resistance to positive changes in their lives. Growth threatens identity stability, and identity stability is a fundamental psychological need. Your undisciplined behaviors might be serving the important function of maintaining a consistent sense of self. The path to sustainable discipline requires gradually shifting your identity while honoring the psychological need for consistency. This means celebrating small wins, focusing on process over outcomes, and being patient with the gradual nature of identity change. You don't become disciplined by forcing yourself to act disciplined. You become disciplined by repeatedly choosing to act like the type of person you want to become until that identity becomes true. The role of perfectionism in discipline: failure. One of the hidden saboteurs of discipline is perfectionism, the belief that your efforts are only worthwhile if they're flawless. Perfectionism masquerades as high standards, but psychologically, it functions as a sophisticated form of self-protection that keeps you from taking action. When you believe that anything less than perfect execution isn't worth doing, you create psychological conditions where starting feels dangerous. If you can't guarantee perfect results, perfectionism convinces you that it's better not to try at all. This way, you can preserve the fantasy of your potential while avoiding the risk of discovering your limitations. Perfectionism creates what researchers call analysis paralysis, the tendency to over-research, overplan and overprepare as a way of avoiding actually beginning. The perfectionist spends hours creating the perfect workout plan, but never exercises. They research the optimal productivity system, but never implement it. They wait for perfect conditions that never arrive. This isn't laziness, it's fear. Perfectionism is often rooted in childhood experiences where love and approval were conditional on performance. If you learned that mistakes led to rejection or criticism, your adult brain still associates imperfect action with psychological danger. But perfectionism also creates what psychologists call moral licensing, the phenomenon where planning or intending to do something good gives you psychological permission to avoid actually doing it. When you spend significant mental energy creating perfect plans, your brain treats the planning as partial completion of the goal, reducing motivation for actual execution. The antidote to perfectionism isn't lowering your standards. It's understanding that excellence emerges through iteration, not through perfect initial attempts. Research on skill development shows that improvement comes through volume of practice with feedback, not through attempting perfect performance from the beginning. This means that good enough execution is infinitely more valuable than perfect planning. Taking imperfect action provides information, builds momentum, and creates opportunities for improvement that perfect planning can never provide. Perfectionism also distorts your relationship with failure. When you expect perfect results, any setback feels like evidence that you're not capable of change. But research on resilience shows that the most successful people aren't those who never fail. They're those who recover from failure quickly and use setbacks as information rather than identity threats. Learning to embrace good enough as a starting point rather than settling for mediocrity is one of the most important psychological shifts for sustainable discipline. When you can take imperfect action without it threatening your self-concept, you become capable of the consistent practice that actually creates excellence over time. The goal isn't to eliminate your drive for quality, but to redirect it toward process improvement, rather than outcome perfection. Focus on becoming slightly better at discipline, rather than becoming perfectly disciplined. Celebrate consistent effort, rather than flawless results. Use mistakes as data rather than proof of inadequacy. This shift from perfectionism to process orientation creates psychological safety around discipline, which makes sustained effort possible rather than sporadic bursts of unsustainable intensity. Building sustainable discipline systems. Understanding why discipline feels impossible is only valuable if you can translate that understanding into practical systems that work with your psychology rather than against it. Sustainable discipline isn't about willpower. It's about design. Environmental design is the foundation of sustainable discipline. Instead of relying on motivation to overcome environmental obstacles, you remove the obstacles and make disciplined behavior the path of least resistance. This might mean removing social media apps from your phone, preparing healthy meals in advance, or creating a dedicated workspace that eliminates distractions. The key principle is friction management. Increase friction around unwanted behaviors while decreasing friction around desired behaviors. Make it harder to access instant gratification and easier to access long-term growth activities. Identity-based habits focus on who you want to become rather than what you want to achieve. Instead of setting a goal to read more, focus on becoming someone who reads daily. Instead of trying to get fit, focus on becoming someone who prioritizes their health. This shift makes behavior feel like identity expression rather than identity violation. Progressive loading applies the principle of gradual increase to behavioral change. Just like physical exercise, your discipline capacity needs to be built gradually through progressive challenge. Start with ridiculously small commitments and increase difficulty only after establishing consistency. Implementation intentions involve pre-deciding specific responses to specific situations. Research shows that people who create if-then plans are significantly more likely to follow through on goals. If it's 6 a.m., then I will exercise for 10 minutes. If I feel the urge to check social media, then I will take 3 deep breaths first. Recovery protocols acknowledge that discipline failure is inevitable and plan specific responses to setbacks. Instead of letting one missed workout become a week of inactivity, you have a predetermined plan for getting back on track quickly. This prevents the shame spiral that turns temporary lapses into permanent abandonment. Support systems leverage social psychology to make discipline easier. This might involve accountability partners, joining communities of people with similar goals, or simply informing others about your commitments. Social support provides external motivation when internal motivation fails. Measurement and feedback create awareness of progress that might otherwise go unnoticed. Track behaviors rather than outcomes. Celebrate consistency rather than perfection. And use data to identify patterns rather than judge performance. Energy management recognizes that discipline requires mental and physical resources that need to be managed strategically. This means scheduling challenging tasks when your energy is highest, protecting your sleep and nutrition, and recognizing that willpower is a limited resource that needs to be allocated wisely. The goal isn't to create perfect systems, but to create systems that acknowledge your psychological realities while supporting your growth goals. These systems should feel sustainable rather than heroic, manageable rather than overwhelming. The integration of shadow and light. Carl Jung believed that psychological health required integration, the conscious acceptance and incorporation of all aspects of personality, including those we'd prefer to ignore. Applied to discipline, this means acknowledging both your capacity for growth and your need for comfort, without judging either as good or bad. Your undisciplined self isn't the enemy of your growth. It's often the protector of your psychological well-being. Avoidance, procrastination, and comfort-seeking behaviors often serve important functions. They provide rest when you're overwhelmed, protection when you're afraid, and pleasure when life feels too difficult. The problem isn't that these protective mechanisms exist. It's that they're often operating unconsciously and automatically, rather than consciously and deliberately. When you're not aware of why you're avoiding something, the avoidance can become compulsive and counterproductive. Integration requires developing what Jung called conscious choice, the ability to choose your responses rather than being driven by unconscious impulses. This doesn't mean always choosing the disciplined option, but it means choosing consciously whether discipline or comfort serves your larger goals in each specific moment. Sometimes the disciplined choice is to push through discomfort toward growth. Sometimes the disciplined choice is to rest when you're genuinely depleted. Sometimes the disciplined choice is to seek pleasure when you've been overly serious and focused. True discipline includes the wisdom to know which choice serves your well-being in each situation. This integrated approach to discipline eliminates the internal war between your good, disciplined self and your bad, comfort-seeking self. Instead of trying to eliminate your capacity for rest and pleasure, you learn to incorporate these needs into a coherent approach to living that serves both immediate well-being and long-term growth. Jung also emphasized that integration required what he called holding the tension of opposites, the psychological capacity to tolerate conflicting needs and desires without immediately resolving them through action. Applied to discipline, this means being able to feel the desire for comfort while also feeling the desire for growth and choosing consciously rather than reactively. This capacity for tension tolerance develops through practice. Each time you feel conflicting impulses without immediately acting on either one, you strengthen your capacity for conscious choice. Each time you pause between impulse and action, you create space for wisdom rather than just reaction. The ultimate goal isn't to become perfectly disciplined, but to become consciously responsive, someone who can choose their actions based on their values and circumstances rather than being driven by unconscious patterns and impulses. This consciousness doesn't eliminate struggle, but it transforms struggle from something that happens to you into something you engage with deliberately. Instead of being at war with yourself, you become curious about yourself. Instead of judging your impulses, you learn from them. The neurobiology of sustainable change. Lasting discipline isn't built through force. It's built through understanding and working with your brain's natural change mechanisms. Neuroscience reveals specific principles that make behavioral change sustainable rather than temporary. Myelination is the process by which frequently used neural pathways become coated with myelin, a fatty substance that makes signal transmission faster and more efficient. Every time you practice a disciplined behavior, you strengthen the myelination of the neural pathways involved, making that behavior easier and more automatic over time. But myelination takes time, typically 30-90 days of consistent practice before new behaviors begin to feel natural rather than effortful. This explains why most people give up on discipline efforts before they reach the neurological tipping point where new behaviors become sustainable. Neurogenesis, the growth of new brain cells, occurs throughout life but is enhanced by specific activities, including exercise, learning new skills, and engaging in challenging but manageable tasks. This means that disciplined activities that involve learning and physical activity literally grow your brain's capacity for discipline. Synaptic pruning is the process by which unused neural connections are eliminated to make room for stronger, more frequently used connections. When you stop practicing undisciplined behaviors, the neural pathways supporting those behaviors gradually weaken through disuse, making them less automatic over time. Default mode network changes occur when you consistently practice mindfulness and self-awareness. The brain's default mode network, active when you're not focused on specific tasks, normally generates mind-wandering, self-referential thinking, and automatic behavioral patterns. Mindfulness practice can alter default mode activity to support more conscious, less reactive responses. Understanding these neurobiological processes reveals why certain approaches to discipline are more effective than others. Consistency over intensity. Because myelination and synaptic strengthening depend on repetition, consistent daily practice of small disciplined behaviors is more effective than sporadic intense efforts. Your brain responds better to steady signals than dramatic but inconsistent ones. Patience with the process. Because neurobiological change takes time, expecting immediate results sets you up for discouragement when change feels slow. Understanding that your brain is literally rewiring itself helps you maintain effort during the initial period when discipline still feels difficult. Progressive challenge. Because neurogenesis is enhanced by learning and growth, gradually increasing the complexity or difficulty of disciplined behaviors supports ongoing brain development. Your discipline capacity can continue growing throughout your life if you continue challenging it appropriately. Recovery and restoration. Because the brain requires downtime to consolidate new learning and growth, periods of rest and recovery are essential parts of discipline development, not obstacles to it. Sleep, relaxation, and stress management support rather than undermine discipline. Holistic health support. Because brain function depends on overall physical health, supporting your discipline with proper nutrition, exercise, and stress management provides the neurobiological foundation that makes behavioral change possible. The most important insight from neurobiology is that your brain wants to support your growth. You just need to work with its natural change mechanisms rather than against them. The spiritual dimension of discipline beyond psychology and neuroscience lies something deeper. The spiritual significance of discipline as a practice of self-respect, personal integrity, and alignment with your highest values. This dimension of discipline transcends technique and touches on fundamental questions of meaning and purpose. When you keep promises to yourself, you're engaging in a form of spiritual practice, demonstrating faith in your own potential and commitment to your own growth. When you choose long-term values over immediate impulses, you're expressing a form of love for your future self and belief in your capacity for transformation. This spiritual dimension explains why discipline failures feel so devastating and why discipline successes feel so meaningful. You're not just changing behaviors, you're practicing the fundamental human capacity for transcendence, for choosing who you become rather than simply accepting who you've been. Viktor Frankl, writing from his experience in Nazi concentration camps, observed that those who survived extreme conditions were often those who maintained a sense of meaning and purpose that transcended immediate circumstances. He identified the human capacity to choose responses to conditions as the ultimate source of freedom and dignity. Applied to discipline, this means that your capacity to choose growth over comfort, future benefit over immediate pleasure, and values over impulses is an expression of your fundamental human dignity. Every disciplined choice is a declaration that you are more than your circumstances, more than your impulses, more than your past patterns. But this spiritual dimension also requires what religious traditions call surrender, releasing attachment to specific outcomes and focusing on the practice itself rather than the results. When discipline becomes about performing your identity as a disciplined person, rather than expressing your commitment to growth, it becomes a form of spiritual materialism that defeats its own purpose. True spiritual discipline involves what the Buddhists call beginner's mind, approaching each moment of choice with curiosity and openness rather than judgment and expectation. This means being willing to start over daily, to forgive yourself for failures, and to maintain effort without attachment to being perfect. Many wisdom traditions teach that discipline is ultimately about service. Not just service to your own growth, but service to something larger than yourself. When your discipline serves, your capacity to contribute to others, to create beauty, to solve problems, or to reduce suffering in the world, it becomes sustainable in ways that purely self-focused discipline cannot. This service orientation transforms discipline from self-improvement project into spiritual practice. You're not just trying to become better, you're developing your capacity to serve life itself more fully. The spiritual dimension doesn't require religious belief, but it does require recognizing that your choices matter not just for you, but for the web of relationships and impacts that flow from your life. When discipline becomes an expression of gratitude for the gift of consciousness and choice, it connects you to sources of motivation that transcend personal gain. Living as a disciplined being. The ultimate goal isn't to become someone who forces themselves to be disciplined. It's to become someone for whom discipline feels natural, meaningful, and aligned with who you are. This transformation requires time, patience, and a willingness to release old identities that no longer serve your growth. Embodied discipline means that disciplined choices feel like expressions of your authentic self, rather than violations of your natural tendencies. When you've integrated the insights about psychology, neuroscience, and identity, discipline stops feeling like self-violence and starts feeling like self-care. This doesn't mean discipline becomes effortless, it means it becomes meaningful. You understand why you're choosing difficulty, what you're growing toward, and how each choice serves your larger vision for your life. The effort has purpose that sustains motivation beyond temporary enthusiasm. Flexible discipline adapts to circumstances while maintaining core commitments. Instead of rigid rules that break under pressure, you develop principles that bend without breaking. You can adjust your exercise routine when you're sick, modify your work schedule when family needs arise, and take breaks when you're genuinely depleted, all while maintaining your identity as someone who prioritizes growth. Compassionate discipline includes kindness toward your human limitations and struggles. You can maintain high standards while also forgiving failures, learning from setbacks, and treating yourself with the same patience you'd offer a good friend who was working to change difficult patterns. Connected discipline serves not just your individual growth, but your capacity to contribute to others and to causes you care about. When your discipline enhances your ability to love, create, serve, and contribute, it becomes sustainable in ways that purely self-focused discipline cannot achieve. Conscious discipline involves ongoing awareness of why you're making specific choices and how those choices serve your deeper values and vision. Instead of following rules automatically, you engage with each choice as an opportunity to express your commitment to growth and service. The paradox of discipline is that the more you understand why it feels impossible, the more possible it becomes. When you stop fighting your psychology and start working with it, when you stop judging your struggles and start learning from them, when you stop forcing change and start supporting it, discipline transforms from something you do to something you are. You are not broken for struggling with discipline. You are human, and humans have the remarkable capacity to understand themselves, to work with their own psychology, and to choose growth even when growth feels difficult. The version of you that procrastinates, avoids, and gives up isn't your enemy. It's part of your psychological ecosystem that needs understanding and integration rather than elimination. The version of you that grows, persists, and chooses difficulty for meaningful outcomes isn't a fantasy. It's a capacity waiting to be developed through conscious practice. The bridge between these two aspects of yourself is built through understanding, patience, and the gradual development of systems and practices that honor both your need for growth and your need for sustainability. This is the psychology of discipline, not the psychology of force, but the psychology of alignment. Not the psychology of perfection, but the psychology of integration. Not the psychology of self-improvement, but the psychology of becoming who you already are beneath the patterns you've practiced. You've never been undisciplined. You've been intelligently adapted to circumstances that no longer serve your growth. An intelligence that can adapt to limiting circumstances can also adapt to circumstances that support your highest potential. The discipline you seek isn't something you need to acquire. It's something you need to remember. It's been waiting inside you, beneath the fear and the habits and the stories about who you are, ready to emerge when you create the conditions that make it safe and sustainable. Start there. Start with understanding. Start with compassion. Start with small choices that honor both who you've been and who you're becoming. And remember, every moment offers a new choice. Every day offers a new beginning. Every breath offers a new opportunity to align your actions with your values. The discipline you seek is seeking you. Meet it halfway.